Hello. You want to see the new chimp commercials? Well, how about this for starters?
Dad, do you know the piano's on my foot?
You hum it, son. I'll play it.
I'd like you to meet man Bond, Brooke Bond.
Morning, sir.
The tea you can really taste.
Super.
Mr. Shilling, we found a tea leaf in the kitchen.
Tea leaf?
I'll admit it, it's a fair cut, Gub.
Lovely.
There's no better tea than PG.
Ignore the tea to beat PG.
It's the taste.
Well, I think what makes the PG Tips case particularly interesting is it's the classic example of how you use advertising to build the long-term profitability of a brand.
And PG Tips shows how advertising can more than pay for itself over the long term, essentially by defending a brand's strong position in a market and defending its price premium.
And really it turned the world of effectiveness upside down by proving there was more to effectiveness than just short-term sales blips. Well, it was a long time ago, but PG before 1955 was actually not even called PG Tips. It was called Pre-Gestive Tea. It was relaunched in 1955 with a more modern name, PG Tips, and a more modern image.
Well, the story goes, and this is a long time ago, the very early days of ITV, and the copywriter was stuck for an idea, went for a walk.
Visited Regent's Park Zoo and happened to see a chimps tea party,
where they had the chimpanzees dressed up in human clothes, and then they gave them teacups and saucers, and everybody had a laugh at them, sort of pouring tea over each other's heads and so forth.
Came back and decided that was a really interesting idea to communicate about the brand. It was also the beginning of TV advertising, and at the end of that year, the first TV ad for PG Tips arrived on screens, featuring a stately home, a chimps tea party, all in black and white with a Peter Sellers voiceover.
The clock strikes 4. In millions of English homes, that means it's tea time. Tea time with its gleaming silver and tinkling teacups. What a happy time it is. And how fortunate the hostess who knows that her favorite tea is also the favorite of her friends. For no matter how elegant the manners or charming the company, no guest is ever really happy without the right kind of tea. Good tea. Fresh tea. Tea you can taste to the last delicious drop.
It means book on PG Tips. Book.
And I think nobody had ever seen anything like it probably in 1956, certainly not in advertising terms. It was enormously, immediately very popular.
And then things really did start to move. So from 56 to 58, the brand went from number 4 to number 1 and has never really looked back.
Consistency was a really important part of the success of this campaign.
There were 3 consistent elements throughout all the advertising. They always used the chimps, they always had a similar style and tonality, and they always invested heavily in TV advertising. But within that consistency, there had to be elements of renewal to keep it interesting and fresh for the audience. And so throughout the whole 32-year campaign, topicality and making the advertising relevant to British life at the time was really important.
By now, this channel last just boring. I mean, we made it. Bonjour, madame.
What have you done to my lawn?
This ain't blinking Calais, this is blinking Catford.
Yeah, what's your blinking French?
Have some more PG, boys.
I knew that hole would make a lovely pond.
You might even get some frogs in here.
The other thing we learn from it is the power of continuity. You know, you must keep going with a great idea. People change them far too rapidly. You know, keep the idea going.
This is about building up a relationship with the brand long term.
That PG Tips is the one that makes me smile when it comes on the television. It's the one that, you know, reflects my own history, it reflects our lifestyle, you know, it goes back 30 years, it's probably a cumulative effect. All those things are what's going on.
So there are many examples of this. Throughout the 60s, the advertising sort of developed a self-expressionist theme, so there are ads featuring chimps as artists, musicians, etc. Then in the 70s, it developed a very topical sort of aspect, so there were parodies of Ted Heath and his yacht. There were parodies of the European Economic Union with the Avez-vous and Cuppa ad, which was very topical and relevant at the time.
Comment ça va? Avez-vous une Cuppa? Ah oui, chérie, la première taille anglaise.
So whilst it was a consistent theme, there was actually a lot of change within the campaign throughout the whole period, which kept it really relevant.
The second element to consistency was consistent share of voice. While the competitors chopped and changed and cut spend and came back on air, PG had a consistent presence on TV over a very long period of time, 30 years or more, in this paper. And that's really important for long-term brand building.
Come on now, Tanya.
Brooke, darling.
Oh, look, it's Brooke! What happened to them villains?
Oh, they've blown it.
Well, from the very start, the results were fairly amazing, actually. I mean, it was launched in 1956. By 1958, they'd moved from number 4 to number 1. They stayed at number 1 throughout the whole of the next 32 years, right up until 1990, when the paper was actually written. And that was despite the fact that they weren't always the heaviest spender on advertising. And it was also despite the fact that the competition was generally the leader in NPD throughout the whole period. So amazing results, really, completely consistent and very strong. Underneath that, every single attribute that we measured for the brand against competitors, it came out number 1 on. So quality, warmth, even colour of the tea, it scored better than the competition throughout the whole period.
Lovely.
There's no better tea than PG.
Yes, Dan. I got a picture.
You never.
Looks like a spaghetti western.
Oh, don't talk bolognese.
The success of the campaign is even more remarkable when you understand that PG Tips didn't really have any great functional advantages. The research that Peter Field and I have done with the IPA shows that people are willing to pay much higher prices for the brands they love. When people taste tea blind, then basically they can't tell the difference between different brands. But if you tell them what the brands are, they'll tell you that PG Tips tastes much better than other teas.
And I think, you know, the point of the IPA paper largely was that there's only one thing that could have created that difference over the long term, and that's really the advertising campaign.
That's an interesting finding in itself because it tells you something about the strength of the brand. But I think what's coming out of brain scanning experiments and neuroscience these days is that when you see effects like that, it's not just people kidding themselves. They actually do enjoy the tea better. It does taste better. As one academic put it, we taste with our minds, not our mouths.
When things get all upside down, you'll never sort them out by sheer force. So get your wife to make you a refreshing pot of Brook Bond PG Tips, while you solve the problem scientifically.
Okay, so what's going on here? There's a thing called mirror neurons in your brain that mean if you see a lot of people smiling, you see people laughing, or hear people laughing, you tend to respond by smiling and laughing yourself. Of course, that makes you feel good. So there are probably many different ways you can try and explain it. They're probably all accurate, but it's by no means as simple as just a simple transmission of a message that says, this is the best tea, or this is a good tasting tea. It's all those other things that are creating the emotional attachment to the brand.
The IPA data mine study showed that the key to profitability is reducing price sensitivity, and that the two things you need to do that are emotional connection and fame. PG Tips had all three elements. All the research we've done suggests that when you get people talking about your ads, then it multiplies the effectiveness of what you do. And this was a perfect example of that. People use the catchphrases.
J'aime votre appétit, monsieur.
Can you ride under me?
They parodied the shows on TV. It was popular advertising that got everyone talking about it.
Have you got the sleeping bags? No, but I've got the big bags. Big bags? Hang on, Simon. I'm okay. Here's Red.
Tetley launched in 1964. It was actually a brand built on tea bags, so it launched as a tea bag brand. There were no other tea bags in the market at the time. PG Tips didn't do tea bags. Surprisingly, PG Tips did nothing for 4 years. They just watched it. They were a bit scared, I think. They didn't really want tea bags to work. They watched it and they clearly were working. So in 1967-68, PG Tips launched their tea bag version. For the next 3 years, they actually didn't spend as much as Tetley, but by 1972, they were brand leader in the tea bag sector of the market, which is amazing, completely amazing if you think about it, and all down to the added value that the brand already had. And I think it was, testament and proof again that added value can beat NPD innovation.
Well, this campaign's a classic open and shut, adding value case. Branding has just given them this defence cloak and the power to beat anyone who tries to disrupt the market with a product initiative.
So people really loved the chimps and they really loved the ads, and they were really relevant to tea values because when you talk to consumers in groups and in research, they talk about the advertising as if it is a pick-me-up itself, which is exactly what they think tea is.
Also, if you look at, I think, just about all the chimps commercials, certainly from about the 60s onwards, they tend to increasingly follow a central drama where something goes wrong, they have a cup of tea, and then, well, it doesn't exactly put it right, but somehow it doesn't much matter.
Oh, I can't hold it, Dad.
Don't worry, son. I shifted more pianos than you've had hot dinners.
Cree, Mr. Shifter, like refreshment.
Oh, thank you most kindly, madam. One way of shifting it.
When a good cup of tea really counts, you're right to drink Brook Bond PG Tips. It's the tea you can really taste.
Dad, do you know the piano's on my foot?
You hum it, son. I'll play it.
The golden age of chimps advertising was probably the early 70s, and you can actually see that in the brand share peaking around 1972. But then it kind of hit another a sort of glory age, I suppose, with the invention of the Tips family, as they were called, which coincided with the launch of the pyramid bag, which was the response to Tetley's round bag. And that kind of gave the chimps a sort of framework to work in, because it was like a soap opera with a family and father and missus and the children and so forth.
Got a new bag with a lot more space. Ain't no drag. Papa's got a brand new bag.
For 30 years, people have been saying, is it time to change the chimps campaign? And I think, fortunately, the answer had always ended up being no, although you could find interesting things on the historical reel where they'd tried it, and it obviously didn't work, and they'd abandoned the idea. But it ended in the end for very practical reasons, that to do those films, you had to have a very particular kind of trained chimp troupe. And there was only one of those left in the world, and eventually there was none left in the world. So the animal rights issues, I think, were also becoming increasingly sensitive. And then, of course, the question was, how do you follow that after 35 years? How do you replace it? We worked on a campaign which had a family of animated birds done by the Aardman studio, which was a good campaign. John Webster was the author of it. A lot of effort went into it, but it never quite took off. So I think where the brand ended up, this is after it left DDB, but bringing in Monkey and Johnny Vegas, I think, was an absolutely inspired solution.
I guess the big challenge for Mother was a category problem. The category itself was in decline, and on top of that, I think the campaign that had followed the Chimps campaign didn't quite land as well as the Chimps did, and so PG Tips actually lost #1 spot in volume and value share to Tetley. So the decision was made that PG Tips needed to try and act like a category captain, even though it was actually #2 at the time, to start actually reviving tea as a category and hopefully benefit disproportionately from that revival. So the role of communications really was to provide the nation with lots of reasons to put the kettle on. We looked at how the chimps campaign worked, and I guess, and this has often been said, the big observation of the chimps campaign is that the consumption of the communication is the same as the consumption of the product, which is how we now describe the Cadbury's Dairy Milk campaign around joy, and the best Coke ads have always had that kind of similar uplifting effect. And similarly, the PG Tips chimps campaign just left people smiling and a little uplifted. And we wanted to have that effect on the viewer. What better way to revive the tea category? And so it was with that observation first, then matching that with, well, OK, well, look, entertaining chimps are part of the brand's DNA. We have the intellectual property rights to a monkey that entertains and is proven to do so on another brand. Why wouldn't we consider that as a potential solution?
1 cup of PG, just how you like it.
3 stairs clockwise.
2 stairs back.
1 3/4 sugars.
Show it the milk. How long are you back for?
I'd like to stay a while. If you'll have me.
Brilliant.
I thought we could make a fresh start.
Get back into the advertising game.
The old team.
The team.
The interesting thing about the PG Tips campaign is how you carry an institution forward. There comes a time in even the most successful campaigns where they cross that line over from being, advertising to entertainment, purely entertainment. And at that point, I don't think the advertiser's necessarily getting value out of that campaign. And I think the trick is to know when that point is and to stop doing what you're doing. But the downside of that is you're throwing away millions of pounds worth of investment in imagery and association, goodwill, etc. So the real challenge, and it's not an easy one, is to reinvest an old campaign, an old property, with something fresh and new. And I think the Johnny Vegas campaign, and even the cheeky appropriation of Monkey, carried on the campaign, paid homage to what had happened before, but took it forward.
When we thought of Alan Monkey as an advertising vehicle, we quickly run up against taboos which said you can't take an advertising vehicle from one brand and repurpose it for the use by another brand. It would confuse consumers, it would compromise brand meaning, etc, etc, etc. Of course, if you stop thinking of them as advertising vehicles and start thinking them as celebrities, all those taboos just dissipate. We'd have no problem in a Joanna Lumley or a David Beckham working with 3 or 4 different brands, from 3 or 4 different categories, with 3 or 4 different purchase cycles, all simultaneously. It's not a problem. And suddenly, when we start to think of Alan Monkey as celebrities, it seemed to make a hell of a lot of sense. There was over £20 million spent on Alan Monkey by ITV Digital, which had an ad stock, and that ad stock was laying dormant. And as soon as we took the assets, Alan Monkey as assets, and flipped them to be used by PG Tips, PG Tips suddenly was the beneficiary of that £20 million, less a decay rate. In this particular instance, because of the striking similarity between our entertaining Monkey and PG Tips chimps campaign, there was, I think, another effect, which is Alan Monkey probably revived the chimps ad stock, which was also laying dormant, and how many millions of pounds were invested in that over the years. So for us, I guess, starting to reframe what we mean by an advertising vehicle, think of it as a celebrity, think of it as a brand's asset that can be flipped and reworked, and it is really just intelligent maximising of previous investment and getting a greater return on that investment, which is, which is just smart business sense.
So I think what Mother have done exceptionally well is made the brand feel new and relevant, but actually tapped into that kind of store of goodwill towards monkeys who drink tea.
We think of Alan Monkey as a double act. We often think of the campaign like a sitcom. But I'd go further than that. I would say dialogue's just important because of the category itself. People, when they're preparing tea or drinking tea, like to have a chat, like to have a banter. Discourse, conversation is important to tea drinkers, and so it felt right for the brand to root itself in dialogue again.
Pay attention now. At 1500 hours, we'll drink another PG Tips containing naturally occurring theanine.
Theanine helps me be relaxed, yet alert.
Indeed. We will utilise PG's focusing properties to help achieve our primary target. Concentrate. Keep it real. Careful. No.
Victory!
Stupid boy.
The chimps always just made you smile and laugh, and similarly when it came round to Alan Monkey's turn to actually talk about taste, you know, by doing it through the medium of a tea orgasm, hopefully it just left people smiling.
Monkey, you know we're always banging on about the delicious taste of PG.
Well, the mortgage won't pay itself.
Yeah. Well, how would you describe that taste?
Let me see. Oh, yeah. Oh, that's splendid. Oh, splendid! Oh, yes! 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 That really is a world-beating, stonkingly tasty cup of tea!
I'll have what he's having.
How would you describe the taste?
It seemed only right, in a way, to do the Morecambe and Wise breakfast scene, because I think in Robert and Mark's mind they had Morecambe and Wise in their heads when they first created Alan Monkey, and the way that the two work together is very similar to how Morecambe and Wise do, and so it felt right to pay homage to that particular